The Erick Erickson Show. So glad to have you with me. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. I just saw this headline. I saw, my goodness gracious, it literally, this news story just hit and I fell out laughing. These are the people who report the news. Yahoo News is, let me read you the headline. Kemp deputy expresses concerns about Georgia's new voting law. There were some things I didn't like, says this deputy to Brian Kemp. Now, I see a headline like this and I think, who in Georgia on Brian Kemp's staff is throwing him under the bus behind the scenes? Is it Brian Kemp's chief of staff? Is it his communications director? Is it his grassroots coordinator? Is it his legislative liaison? Nope. Who is the Kemp deputy expressing concerns? It is the independently elected lieutenant governor of the state of Georgia, not a Kemp deputy. Not a Kemp deputy. Yet Yahoo News is writing it that way. Now, I'm not going to attribute maliciousness to incompetence. I don't know who this reporter is, Marquise Francis. I have no idea who he is. I will not attribute maliciousness to incompetence. I assume it is incompetence, but it is a reminder of the overall incompetence. My goodness. Also, you should know that Joe Biden is calling for a boycott of Georgia. That's right. Joe Biden, the president of the United States, wants one of the 50 states boycotted. He's urging Major League Baseball to remove its all-star game from the TP. For those of you who have no idea, so the Braves field used to be SunTrust Park. Well, SunTrust Bank was bought by the bank BB&T from North Carolina. They changed the name of the park to Truist Field. Truist, so BB&T and SunTrust merge. And instead of being Truth Bank or True Bank, it's Truist. It's like truthy, but not really honest. It is a bank after all. And I just refuse to call the park Truist Park. They should have named it Hank Aaron Field or Bobby Cox Stadium, something. But no, they went with Truist, and they said that the fans wanted it. The fans wanted it. Not really. If the fans were like the executives of the board of the banks, maybe so. So if we got to go with Truist Park, I'm just calling it the TP. It is the Braves after all, until the wokes force the Braves to change their name. Now, we'll get back to all of this. There's actually a big story happening right now. Rita Hart has abandoned Iowa. She's decided, stop it. Don't do it anymore. This is one of the genuinely the most bizarre news stories. The characterization of this has been surreal to me, watching the media's rank dishonesty in covering this. Now, for those of you who do not know, in Iowa, Rita Hart was the Democrat who lost. She lost by 6 votes. Now, in fairness to her, and this is why she wanted the House of Representatives to throw out the election, the Republican, what's her name? Miller, Marionette Miller Meeks, yes. In fairness, Republican Miller Meeks, this is the closest House race in a century. She won by 6 votes. There were 22 ballots that were not counted. Now, the Washington Post says they were lawfully cast. They weren't. The reason the 22 votes were not counted, and we do know they did open and look at the ballots. Had they been counted, the Democrat would have won barely. But the reason that they were not counted is because they violated Iowa law. Iowa law has standards for how to process absentee ballots. The very same Democrats who told us we had to follow the standards are now saying, let's ignore the standards. So finally, Rita Hart has decided to drop it. Now, why? This is where the Washington Post headline comes in. She calls it a toxic campaign of political disinformation. Democrat Rita Hart has dropped her challenge in the Iowa 2nd Congressional District race, asking the House to no longer consider an investigation into the outcome of her race against Republican Marinette Miller Meeks following intense Republican pushback. In a statement released Wednesday, Hart said she decided to inform the House Administration Committee to no longer investigate her case after having numerous conversations with people about the future of the investigation. She blamed Republican criticism in announcing her decision. Our best efforts to have every vote counted, the reality, despite our best efforts to have every vote counted, the reality is that the toxic campaign of political disinformation to attack this constitutional review of the closest contest in 100 years has effectively silenced the voices of Iowans. It hasn't silenced the voices of Iowans. It silenced the voices of 22 idiots who didn't know how to do an absentee ballot. That's it. 22 people. They were, when confronted with the laws of Iowa, could not figure out how to do the absentee ballots. Out of the thousands of absentee ballots cast, there were 22 people not smart enough to follow the law. Stupid people probably shouldn't vote. And, well, 22 stupid people didn't follow the law. They had their ballots rejected and elected a Republican. If they were shamefully unaware of this, well, now they can be shamefully aware that they were too stupid to figure out how to absolutely cast an absentee ballot. Look, I'm sorry. You got to sign your ballot. One genius decided to wrap the ballot in tape. Like the outer envelope, sealed it up so tight that it was difficult to get it open without tearing everything. The other people forgot to sign your absentee ballot. It's kind of absentee balloting 101 that you sign your absentee ballot. And if you don't, it doesn't get counted. And they were like, it was really my ballot. And I'm sorry, I didn't read the bold all-cap print that said sign my ballot or else. I have no sympathy for these people. I'm sorry. You got to follow the law. And what the Democrats did after January 6th is they want to throw Marjorie Taylor Greene out of the House and Josh Hawley out of the Senate for daring to challenge the Electoral College. And here they come trying to challenge the election in Iowa. And by the way, the Democrat, Rita Hart, she never even bothered to go to court. At least Donald Trump went to court. She didn't even bother. She just said, well, I'll let Nancy Pelosi throw it to me. She was the incumbent in the seat, the Democrat. Well, she lost. Now, the Democrats did go on and seat a Miller Meeks. When the election was certified, the Democrats seated her. And that's part of the cruelty here is they seated Miller Meeks, the Republican, and now we're going to throw her butt out of Congress. And the Republicans targeted a number of the Democrats who were concerned about January 6th, and we got to count every vote. We got to certified elections are sacrosanct, and we can't overturn a certified election. And they started running ads in the district saying, hey, this person said an election that is certified by the state, you can't overturn it. And now they want to overturn this election that was certified by the state. So they had 9. Now, remember, the Democrats, because of this, they have a 5-seat majority. They can only lose 3 votes if Republicans stick together. The Republicans were all sticking together. The Liz Cheney wing to the Jody Hice, Marjorie Taylor Greene wing, they were all sticking together. And 9 Democrats began to cave. The votes weren't there, so Rita Hart bowed out. But if those Democrats had held their ground, you can be darn sure Rita Hart would have stayed around and tried to steal this election, even though it was certified by the state. Now, we must move on because the Biden infrastructure plan has been unveiled. Y'all, this is not an April. Now, listen, I'm actually kind of vehemently opposed to April Fool's jokes. 1, I'm bad at them. 2, I fall for them. And 3, I just think most of them are not very funny. Volkswagen, the car dealer or the car manufacturer, announced yesterday or day before yesterday it was going to change its name to Volkswagen, VOLTS, as in electrical volts. and it went really badly for them. No one found it funny. Everyone found it very stupid, and now Volkswagen is having to come out and apologize. It really is stupid. Let's just this rush for electric cars. You know, one of the dumbest ideas out now about the environment and the Green New Deal and all of that is that somehow we can build a national major electric grid and we can all have electric cars. And please just don't look at all the children in Africa we're killing to dig out the lithium for the batteries. Don't look at the land pollution we're causing, because who cares about the land? It's just a bunch of Africans. That is essentially where environmentalists, Western environmentalists, are these days. Western environmentalists are actually some of the biggest polluters on the planet. You have the Hollywood celebrity who flies his private jet all over the world and gets on yachts and vacations. But ultimately, what you have are the peacenik environmentalists of the left in Hollywood and in the West who have decided we need to kill all the cows, but then kill all the poor kids in Africa who are the ones doing the underage mining of lithium batteries. We have all of this moral outrage about China and the Uyghurs and cotton and all of that, but pay no attention to what we're doing to get batteries, particularly the rare earth minerals in Africa, and who's actually the one doing the mining. You know, the left is actually horrified of the idea that Africans may actually overcome malaria. Instead of letting them spray low doses of DDT to kill mosquitoes, they got to put them under nets and hopefully maybe come up with some other way to wipe out malaria, if ever. But God forbid they should want to spray DDT, and God forbid they should get an air conditioner. If the Africans get an air conditioner, you could cause the entire world to spiral into Venus. We'd have out of control global warming. They literally, there are environmentalists who live in fear of this. They want to keep Africa pre-colonial, undeveloped, because the African continent is actually the largest continent, has massive numbers of people. It is, if you actually look at a globe, if Africa were a single nation, it'd be the biggest nation. It's a massive landmass. Multiple geographic areas. You got desert, you got jungle, you got plains, you got places where it snows even. You got penguins in the southern tip of South Africa. It is a massive continent. It is underdeveloped. And the left lives in fear of Africa's development, and they're perfectly happy to allow kids in Africa to pollute their own ground to get the batteries so the leftists can sleep well at night after driving their Teslas and electric vehicles all day. They're trying to make these trade-offs. Well, we gotta stop global warming, and so to stop global warming, we can actually engage in land pollution for the rare earth minerals. That's okay, because that only affects a little area, and global warming affects us all. These are the trade-offs they're making that they don't want to talk about. It's rather ridiculous. Well, the Biden administration has, with its infrastructure plan, decided to go all in on batteries and electric vehicles, and they actually want to use this infrastructure plan as a vehicle for a $2 trillion Green New Deal. I've got the details, including some pretty outrageous examples of what's in the package. When we come back, wait until you hear what they think is an infrastructure project.
There's not my truth or your truth.
Hello there. It is Erick Erickson here. The phone number, if you want to be a part of the program, 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. In the next hour of this here program, my longtime friend Victoria Coates is going to join me. Victoria was a deputy national security advisor for President Trump and then moved over to Saudi Arabia and helped Jared Kushner with the deals in Saudi Arabia. And then in the third hour, Nikki Haley, former UN ambassador and governor of South Carolina, is going to join me, also a longtime friend of mine. Tomorrow, Tim Keller is going to join me on the program. I'm not sure what time yet, so stick around. He's battling pancreatic cancer. We're working around his schedule, trying to be as flexible as possible. Not sure yet. I'll let you know. But Tim Keller will be joining me tomorrow, Good Friday, to talk about his new book, Hope in Times of Fear, The Resurrection and the Meaning of Easter. Right now, I got to give you these. The Foundation for Economic Education has 9 crazy examples of unrelated waste and partisan spending in Biden's $2 trillion infrastructure proposal. Foundation for Economic Education went through the initial proposal, and Brad Palumbo put this out. This is actually kind of crazy, and it comes directly from the fact sheet from the Biden administration. No spin here, no wading into legalese. This is from the fact sheet. 1, $10 billion to create a civilian climate corps. A civilian climate corps. $20 billion to advance racial equity and environmental justice. $175 billion in subsidies for electric vehicles. The spending would take the form of manufacturing subsidies and consumer tax credits. So essentially another tax cut for the rich people who want fancy cars. $213 billion to build or retrofit 2 million houses and buildings as part of the Green New Deal to, quote, disproportionately benefit women, people of color, and people with disabilities, end quote. $100 billion for new public schools and making school lunches even greener by eliminating the use of plastic plates and other disposable materials. So you're going to start eating out of your hands. They're going to pour the soup into your hands. You're going to cup it like a bowl and be like little Tiny Tim or something. Who's the Charles Dickens orphan? $12 billion for community colleges. Billions, unspecified billions, to eliminate racial and gender inequities. Not inequality, but inequities in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math research and development. How that has to do with infrastructure spending, I have no idea. $100 billion to expand broadband internet and have the government maintain control of it. Yeah, that's right. The proposal openly states that it wishes to promote government and NGO, that's non-governmental organization, control of broadband and push out private sector providers. It prioritizes support for broadband networks owned, operated by, or affiliated with local governments, nonprofits, and cooperatives, providers with less pressure to turn profits, less pressure to build a better product. $25 billion for government child care programs to help upgrade child care facilities and increase the supply of child care in areas that most need it. The funding would be provided through a child care growth and innovation fund for states to build a supply of infant and toddler care in high-need areas. Only 10% of his $1.9 trillion COVID relief package actually went to COVID relief. And now we've got this. We're going to make public school lunches greener. We're going to eliminate racial and gender inequities in STEM education and research. And $20 billion to advance racial equity and environmental justice. And then create a climate civilian corps with $10 billion. That's the Biden proposal. That's what he's unveiling. That is just 9 of his infrastructure requests. This is an infrastructure proposal that has nothing to do with infrastructure. It has to do with fundamentally transforming America. And we can thank the people of Georgia for electing 2 Democratic senators to make it possible for him to get this through. The Senate Democrats are looking at a sneaky provision to get around the filibuster. They get 1 time a year to do a reconciliation package, and now they're going to argue, actually, because we're changing the budget, we should get a second reconciliation package through. We'll see if the Senate parliamentarian lets them. This is what look, the folks down in Georgia believed the disinformation campaign that the January election was going to be stolen by the Democrats, so why bother to vote? And so they stayed home. 427,205 Republicans stayed home, allowing John Ossoff to win by 52,000 votes, and that's why the Democrats can do this stuff. The Republicans believe the lie. Hello and welcome. It is Erick Erickson here. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Y'all, prayers. The boy, he's reached the age. Got to have the talk. If I sound a little distracted, it's, and just for those of you who haven't gotten there yet and you don't understand the way this works, essentially the wife has the talk with the husband and says it's time to have the talk with the boy. Oh, my dad never did with me. So we will I'm here a little bit ponderous in which direction do I go? Yeah, and all of that. Part of this is, and you'll just have to forgive the deviation here from anything. I got to get to this Biden story, but this really is on my mind. Part of this is as well. I take, I tend to think about things somewhat at a theological level. There's that the story in Genesis of Noah and Noah's entire family gets on the ark with him, and they get on the ark with him not because of anything they've done, but because Noah himself found favor with God. And the way I learned this in seminary, and I realize some people disagree, but I take it as true, is very much that if you have a child, until your child reaches an age of discernment for themselves, if your kid drops dead tomorrow through tragedy, they're going to go to heaven if you're a believer. But at some point, they got to build their own relationship and go their separate ways from their parents. Leave and cleave, as the Bible would say. And so I feel like I got to have a deeper conversation than the standard conversation because I want my kid to understand this as well, that at some point you have to take ownership of your own faith. And thinking of all of that, I just saw this quote cross Twitter during commercial breaks. Judas, who we will remember tomorrow, what Judas did. Judas was there for every sermon and saw all the miracles. He was there for every sermon, Judas was, and he saw all the miracles. So you gotta deal with your faith. Now, we gotta talk about this Biden situation. Biden is actively calling for a boycott of Georgia. And that's going to be one of the deep problems that Georgia faces right now as everybody gangs up on Georgia, and so much of it is not true. Even the Washington Post is calling out Joe Biden for his demagoguery and his misstatements about Georgia. It's actually pretty remarkable. My buddy Dan McLaughlin, who writes at National Review, pointed out that the one truth of Georgia being like it was in Jim Crow is that Georgia now has 2 Democratic senators. President Biden, according to the New York Times, said he would strongly support Major League Baseball moving its All-Star game from Atlanta. The executive director of the Players Union has said he was open to discussing such a move after Georgia Republicans passed a law to restrict voting access. Here's the thing. You got Raphael Warnock, who is trying to avoid this. This is dragging Warnock in. And now you've got Joe Biden targeting the state of Georgia. In an interview on ESPN, President Biden discussed the restrictions passed by the state's Republicans. President Biden said on Wednesday he would strongly support Major League Baseball moving its All-Star game from Atlanta after the executive director of the Players Union said he was open to discussing such a move after Georgia Republicans passed a law last week to restrict voting access in the state. The very people who are victimized the most are the people who are the leaders in these various sports. What? The very people victimized the most are the people who are the leaders in these sports? The rich dudes who play baseball are going to be victimized by a law on voting? His comments came the same day major companies like Delta, Georgia's largest employer, sharply criticized the legislation, in the face of mounting pressure from activists, customers, and black executives. The law introduced stricter voting identification requirements for absentee balloting and limited drop boxes in predominantly black neighborhoods, and it expanded the legislature's power over elections. That's actually a lie, limited drop boxes. Actually, drop boxes in Georgia aren't legal. They were only made so because of the pandemic, and the moment the governor's order expires, which may come any day, the drop boxes legally have to go away, and the legislature has now allowed them to stay. This is Jim Crow on steroids, what they're doing in Georgia, Joe Biden told Sage Steele on ESPN. Jim Crow on steroids? Because we're passing a law in Georgia. I don't know if you guys nationally realize this. I'm here in Georgia, and the law actually requires that precincts be added and machines be added to precincts to reduce the lines. So, people are blasting Ben Shapiro for having said yesterday that long lines are not suppression at Disney World any more than they're suppression for voting. And the point of the law actually is that we're getting rid of the long lines in Georgia by adding precincts and machines. That's actually part of the law. That's part of the package. And it's interesting that the New York Times is seizing on stricter voter identification requirements for absentee ballots because that's actually overwhelmingly popular with voters, black and white. In the ESPN interview, the president encouraged baseball fans to wear masks and abide by social distancing protocols, while spectators are required to wear masks at every ballpark. Policies have differed depending on the guidance of each state or city. The Texas Rangers plan to open their stadium in Arlington to full capacity, allowing 40,300 fans. I think it's a mistake. They should listen to Dr. Fauci and the scientists and the experts, Mr. Biden said, referring to Dr. Anthony Fauci, the government's top infectious disease expert. But I think it's not responsible. Now, the New York Times did a story the other day that the Texas Rangers are opening to full capacity, and they're not even getting a quarter of the crowd size. Now, part of that, if we're honest, is the Texas Rangers suck. I mean, the Texas Rangers are hot trash. Gone are the days of any of the great heroes of the Texas Rangers. Gone are the days of George W. Bush's ownership of the Texas Rangers. They're just hot garbage right now, if we're honest about it. They could use Nolan Ryan, even in retirement, to come help them. The Rangers aren't good. But, so part of the reason that they're not even filling a quarter of their stadium is that they suck. But part of the reason is, surprise, 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 voters, residents, Americans, they're making responsible decisions for themselves at this point. If you have listened to me regularly since the pandemic was beginning in January of last year, I have said, you probably should wear a mask. For a time, they were saying you didn't need to wear a mask. When the data changed, their statements changed. It really isn't about government control, the wearing of the mask. I don't want to relitigate the issue with you, but basically, if I wear a mask and you don't wear a mask, and you're sick and I'm not sick, the mask does me no good. You not wearing a mask and being sick will not, me wearing a mask isn't going to help me, or barely. It is, if I am sick and I don't know it and I wear a mask, I help prevent the transmission. And a lot of the people who get the virus are asymptomatic. They never know they had the virus and they're spreading it. And now there's been misinformation out there that if you're asymptomatic, you can't spread the virus. Actually, that was a bad reading of the scientific report. The scientific report showed that asymptomatic people do transmit the virus. And it was willfully misconstrued by people on the internet to say that the report said they didn't, which was a lie. So the mask actually is because I may be sick and not know it. And it actually does help me redirect my airstream up or down, not forward, so then gravity takes over. But I have said all this time, you should wear a mask. But we're at the point in this pandemic where my position is very clear now that, people are going to take a chance. People are going to make up their own mind. There's no reason to bully and badger and cajole people. You don't need to mask shame anyone. You never should have masked shame someone. The Karens of the internet online demanding you wear a mask, hounding you down in the local Walmart, yelling at you for not wearing a mask. Leave them alone. It's their business. If they get sick, they get sick. It's not on you. Yes, they did because no, shut up. I wear a mask in places that have signs to wear masks. I try to be, and I've had both vaccines now, and I know it can put other people at ease. I feel comfortable going out and about. I was at an event the other night where, having had both shots, there were people there who weren't wearing masks, and I felt totally comfortable. It was actually very weird, but there's this idea that the American public will not make responsible decisions for themselves a year after lecturing us all about the virus. The fact that people aren't showing up at Texas Rangers games, not just because they suck, but because people don't feel comfortable being in crowds, is actually a really good sign that the American public is moving on. What is a very terrible sign is that Joe Biden, in the process of trying to educate Americans or urge them to do what he perceives to be the right thing, is urging an economic boycott of one of the 50 states. Can you imagine the reaction if Donald Trump had urged people to boycott a particular state? Can you imagine what the media reaction would be if Donald Trump urged a boycott? It is the left doing this, and Joe Biden, who claimed, remember, Joe Biden claimed that he was going to be elected and he was going to be a uniter, he was going to bring unity, and what is he doing? Y'all boycott Georgia because they passed a law that I don't like. He's gone all in with the wokes. This is turning into a bit of celebrity nonsense. You've got Delta, Coca-Cola, Home Depot, others. Now that the law is passed, coming out. By the way, the governor of Georgia, I mentioned yesterday, released a pretty scathing statement about Delta, that Delta behind the scenes lobbied for changes in the piece of legislation. Delta got all of the changes they lobbied for, and the governor noted they didn't raise an objection to a single thing that was in the final package. And in fact, the day after he signed it, they released a statement praising the law. It was only after the wokes got upset, threatened to boycott, that they released their hand-wringing statement of, we're an Atlanta, not a Georgia company, an Atlanta company, and we don't like this. Upon further reflection and listening to the terrorists out there, the wokes, they decided, we got to be outraged now. But, it's kind of funny because what actually happened is they let the law pass, they let the governor sign into the law, and then they got outraged now that there's nothing they can do about it. They didn't do anything in the process. In fact, the things that they wanted fixed, they got fixed. And now you got Joe Biden coming out blatantly misrepresenting this. This is going to end badly for all of us. Y'all, I actually have a deep fear and concern that we are headed toward the violent crack up of this country. Because the left has applied a moral layer of justification to every time it cancels someone, threatens an economic boycott, chooses to punish someone. They all deserved it. And they disproportionately are able to use the wokes within the Fortune 500 to carry out their agenda and try to silence people and have their way. And then they justify it as, well, you believe in the free market. We've decided to move our dollars elsewhere. We're not going to come to Georgia. That argument sounds good on the surface, except the problem is you're choosing to avoid one of the 50 sovereign, semi-sovereign states in this nation because you don't like that they passed a law. If we all start doing that, we're all going to start avoiding each other at a time we need more unity. But the left moralizes about this division. The left moralizes about punishing. And what that's going to do is because they have disproportionate cultural clout right now, they're going to see the crack up of the country. And I think many of them at this point, they actually like the idea of breaking apart the country because they really don't want to live with the people of Florida or Louisiana or Alabama or Georgia. They feel they're better than them. They're more morally virtuous with their lack of morality. This doesn't end well for any of us, the way this goes. And they can't help it. They keep pushing. They got to punish. They've got to economically boycott. They got to go after conservative advertisers. They got to go after people who advertise on Fox News. They've got to have their way. At some point, it's going to cause a violent reaction. It's not justified. It's not condoned. But I'm telling you it's coming. Because there are a lot of people who feel like The cultural left in this country right now is bullying, and they've been trained to punch back at bullies. And it's going to end badly for every single one of us when it starts to happen. And Joe Biden could tamp down on this, but Joe Biden is surrounded by a bunch of people who feed him lies, and he regurgitates the lies, and it exacerbates the situation. And that situation is going to come to a head. And by the way, it's probably going to ruin baseball as well. I mean, have you seen the numbers for NBA games? People got tired, and football games. People are getting tired of the wokes capturing professional sports teams and forcing them to do their woke bidding. People are tuning out. It's going to cause massive economic calamity within professional sports. It's going to cause all sorts of calamity within the country, and the wokes will moralize until the very bitter end of this country that, well, the other side got what they deserved, and, you believe in the free market. I can't understand why you think we shouldn't be able to boycott. Well, the problem is you got the right. The question is, should you exercise it?
You can follow Erick around social media.
Hello there, it is Erick Erickson here. Y'all, have you ordered from Omaha Steaks yet? They're telling me you're listening to me, and that's good because not only does it help the show, but it helps you because it is delicious. At Omaha Steaks right now, if you go to omahasteaks.com, you put Georgia in the search bar, Georgia, and you will see the Butcher's Bestsellers. It's an incredible package of some of the best meat that Omaha Steaks has. Their steaks, they've got their burgers, chicken breasts, kielbasa sausages, the caramel apple tartlets. You can get a whole meal, restaurant quality at your house. So, with the beef, Omaha Steaks ages it for at least 21 days. Their steak burgers, the Omaha Steak burgers are incredible. They've got such great flavor. You can do smash burgers out on your griddle. Oh my gosh, they're so good. And right now, if you go to Omaha Steaks, you're going to get 4 free chicken breasts and 4 more of those great burgers. So you'll get an extra value add to your Butcher's Bestsellers package. To get it, though, you got to go to omahasteaks.com, and you've got to put Georgia in the search bar. Now, I will tell you, this package doesn't come with bacon wrap fillets that I genuinely I keep them in my freezer at all times. You can thaw them out individually, throw them on the grill, put them in the skillet, and do it that way with the oven. They're great. You can add those though. You can add seafood. They got pork, poultry, seafood. I got a brisket from one of my steaks, smoked it on my Rectech. There's so much there. But the Butcher's bestsellers, if you want a great introductory package that'll feed your family, with the summer coming, the holidays coming, you want a great way to go to omahasteaks.com. Put Georgia, the name of the state, Georgia, in the search bar. You'll get this. Now, we got to move on to other stuff because, my goodness, there is a lot to talk about, including the Democrats are having some serious problems gaining unity. You know, we've been talking about H.R. 1, their voting rights bill and their reform package. Well, Joe Manchin himself is signaling problems, but let me read you a key paragraph. While few Democrats are willing to publicly say so, the details of the more than 800-page bill, which would radically reshape the way elections are run and make far-reaching changes to campaign finance laws and redistricting, have become a point of simmering contention. Some proponents argue that Democrats should break off a narrower bill dealing strictly with protecting voting rights to prevent the legislation known as the For the People Act from collapsing among divisions over other issues. A broad coalition of Democrats and liberal advocacy groups insist the measure should not be broken apart, arguing that now is the time for an ambitious overhaul. But with Senator Joe Manchin, a conservative West Virginia Democrat, opposed to the measure in its current form, Democratic leaders and Mr. Biden face tough decisions in the coming weeks about whether they can wrangle all their members behind it more or less as is, or must consider striking a narrower compromise. The margin for error is exceedingly thin, with Republicans unanimously opposed. Democrats would not only need to hold all 50 of their senators together in favor of the bill, but also persuade them to change the Senate rules to exempt it from the legislative filibuster, something Mr. Manchin and others have insisted they will not do under any circumstance. In other words, what the New York Times is signaling to Democrats is that it's not just Joe Manchin opposed to this legislation or to changing the filibuster. It's not just Joe Manchin. That, my friends, is a big red flag for the Democrats' agenda moving forward. They may be able to get Manchin on some of their fiscal measures, but not on this. Not on this. We'll see if they can build up a coalition. You know, the Republicans are a little nervous about 2022 because they're on defense, but it really does look like they could take back the House, and all this stuff would have to start over again. And there's just no way they're gonna let this stuff happen. Now, when we come back, my friend Victoria Coates is going to join me. She was a deputy national security advisor for President Trump. She helped shape the Middle East peace deals with Jared Kushner, a longtime friend of mine, and I want to talk to her about the national security threats we're facing that the Biden administration tends to actually be oblivious to, including how easy it is to block the Suez Canal, something that there's no strategy to deal with, clearly. Hello and welcome. It is Erick Erickson here. Glad to have you with me. The phone number, if you want to be on the show, 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. You can always go to ewerickson.com. You can even get recipes there. Isn't that incredible? Tomorrow, Tim Keller is going to join me to talk about his new book, Hope in Times of Fear. Right now, though, I got a treat for y'all. A longtime friend of mine who was a senior advisor to President Trump's energy secretary and also served on the National Security Council as a special assistant to President Trump. She got her start as an art history professor and started to write about military affairs, captured the eye of then Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld. She's advised presidential candidates, worked for President Trump, and she also, this is the coolest thing on her resume, she is a friend of Erick Erickson, and her husband is awesome too. My friend Victoria Coates, how are you?
Eric, it's wonderful to be with you.
Okay, so I got to begin always by asking how George is.
George is excellent. He sends his very best to you and to Christy, and he's enjoying his Traeger and the nice weather and having nice. A wonderful time looking at some of your recipes.
Well, I got to actually send him an email because I got shotgun input I need to get from him on as I'm about to endeavor to go turkey hunting. I need his thoughts, but that's not why
he will have thoughts.
Good. All right. I want to ask you first about this piece in Bloomberg that you and Robert Greenway wrote, because who knew you could screw up the entire world economy with a gust of wind causing a tanker to block the Suez Canal? And I got to imagine that there are nefarious people out there thinking, we could do that too.
Oh, absolutely. And, gusts of wind have been much in the news in recent weeks, wreaking havoc from Air Force One to the Suez Canal. But it's something that Rob and I, both of whom, we both served as the National Security Council staff in the Middle East and North African Directorate, and we've been worried about this for a while, and that's why we had some very specific proposals in that piece for how we could better secure the canal. I mean, the biggest problem is this awful Convention of Constantinople from 1888, which Egypt wasn't even a signatory to. Most of the people who signed it no longer exist. It's like the Ottoman Empire and the Russian Empire and the French Third Republic. And what it resulted in is Egypt taking a very passive attitude towards Suez security. And I think what we saw with the Ever Given and the very quick breakdown of international supply chains with that choke point is that, as you said, nefarious actors can look at this and say, gee, this is pretty fragile. We could take a shot at this. And particularly concerned about the Iranians, who have already proven themselves willing to attack commercial shipping and, do things like turn their GPS off to try to evade sanctions.
Well, yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the Iranians because, I mean, I grew up over there, and my dad worked offshore in the Persian Gulf, and having dealt with Iranian problems for years, some of my best friends growing up had fled when the Shah fell. And Iran has an expansive footprint where they try to keep their fingerprints off things and yet cause problems. And I can see, particularly given Egypt's relationships with Israel now, which are pretty good, that you've got some of the terrorist groups affiliated with Iran could want to cause trouble. And this clearly makes it possible for them to know they could get in there and wreak all sorts of havoc on the entire world.
Oh, absolutely. And, the big threat there are the Houthi in Yemen, who the Wall Street Journal reported today have launched no less than 80 attacks on Saudi Arabia since the inauguration. And the response of the Biden administration has been to reduce the Patriot batteries, the missile defense systems that we have had stationed in Saudi Arabia. Which is just inexplicable to me.
Well, let me interrupt you here and ask you this, because I've got a theory, and I try not to say it too often because I don't want to sound too conspiracist, but it does seem to me that when the Biden administration came in and they started cracking down on Saudi Arabia, it comes at the same time as they're getting rid of the Keystone XL pipeline expansion, and it just seems like there is a thinking within this administration, like the Obama administration, that anything they can do to cause oil prices to go up to lessen demand is good, and that includes some of the destabilization issues of the Middle East.
Oh, I don't think that's a conspiracy theory at all.
Yes.
I think the if it is the Middle East, of course, Eric.
Yeah.
So anything's fair game. But in this case, I think if you look at the national security interim strategy that they put out in the beginning of March, climate is their driving force. It's their holy grail, and it's all of their policies are coordinated to support their quest for a grand climate deal, primarily with China. And so everything else is subservient to that. It's driving the JCPOA activity. It is certainly driving their rejection of our Gulf allies, particularly Saudi Arabia and UAE. And it's counterproductive because I spent a lot of time in both Saudi and UAE last year. They are both at the forefront of renewable and alternative energy research. They want to be leaders in those fields. They don't want to be gas stations in perpetuity. Mm-hmm. And the administration could take the responsible path of partnering with them on that research and development, because we also are world leaders in that field. And instead, they're pushing them away. I don't think it's a coincidence that one of the top Chinese diplomats that was in Anchorage with Blinken and Sullivan 10 days ago was just in Riyadh. And if we continue down this path, I think what we'll see is just increased Chinese influence in the region.
Well, yeah. Let me ask you about that, because I don't think this gets enough attention, and every time I bring it up, I'm shocked by the number of people, not people in politics, but just your average American who don't understand that one of the things China has been doing around the world is causing a lot of countries to go into debt, where they then essentially say, "Well, forgive your debt if you let us build a base, or you let us take over your rare earth mineral mines." And they seem to be, particularly even in the Western Hemisphere, as we've abandoned the Monroe Doctrine, making inroads south of the border. I think it's only within the next decade or so we will be surprised when we find out China has some sort of larger military presence than we realized in certain South American countries.
Oh, I think that's absolutely the case. And in the Western Hemisphere, the big concern is the Panama Canal, speaking of canals, mm-hmm. Where they have been buying up land around the canal, which is a really horrible idea. And, in the Middle East, the deal they just inked with the Iranians, among other things, the premise of the Wall Street Journal article I mentioned is that the administration wants to pivot away from the Middle East in order to focus on China. The paradox there is, well, if you want to focus on China, the best place to do it is the Middle East, right? Because that's where China is the most vulnerable, because as the world's largest energy importer, they have to have access to the Middle East. So if we control that, we have enormous leverage over China, but we are voluntarily abdicating that leverage.
Yeah. And so you worked inside the Trump administration, and I know they struggled with this, of finding the balance of not being the world's policeman while also staying engaged in ways that are strategically beneficial to us. And oftentimes I think people saw our engagement in the Middle East in the Trump administration and said, wait, you said you wanted to get out of there. Why are you there? And yet there are national security reasons we've got to be.
Well, there are, but there are also economic reasons. There is a lot of money to be made, and I think the American people should participate in that prosperity. And one of the things, I want to do out of government is try to support those relationships by fostering private industry interaction, both investment in the United States and U.S. investment in the region, because it is the opposite of what you were just describing in terms of China, which is predatory mm-hmm. in its foreign investment and uses it as a tool of coercion. And we do the opposite. We show up, we invest, everybody makes money, jobs are created, wealth is created. It's an incredibly positive thing, and only we can offer it. And so rather than saying, let's deploy, endless amounts of troops, we do need some security assets, obviously, and I think particularly missile defense would be critically important. But we can also do this in a way that isn't military. And I think, something President Trump was obviously interested in, and I think it's something, we can all continue to support.
Now, excuse me, let me ask you this before we wrap up here. If you could be in charge for a day What do you think are some of the primary things that we need to do to really contain China beyond just um, dealing with them in the Middle East and trying to control as much of the energy reserve they're dependent on? It just seems like there's no clear path forward, particularly with this administration, on what to do.
Well, I mean, I would start with the energy piece because it's our great advantage if we continue with the American energy renaissance, and it's their great disadvantage, and they know it, and they're frightened of it. And so I would start with a focus right there. But on top of that, I would exploit the fact that we do have alliances, and we treat our allies well most of the time, and that we could create regional networks of alliances in sort of like NATO, but more with an economic and an energy component to them, as well as security, where we provide leadership, but the regional countries do the heavy lifting. And, if you look at the Middle East, what could be so helpful about that particular region is the integration of Israel. And now, because of our historic investment in Israel and Israel's normalization, particularly with Bahrain and UAE, they can provide the regional leadership and a lot of the material required because we've already given it to them.
Mm-hmm.
So, we can leverage that investment and, we could have a much more, I think, agile but effective presence through that kind of vehicle. So that's what I would do if I were queen for a day.
It's amazing to me how even a country like Vietnam, a communist country, is looking to us for some help and leadership in dealing with China, a nation that you would think they would be sympathetic to, except for the fishing rights and controls of the South China Sea and the like. It's just it seems like we're at a point in global alliance making where American leadership could come in handy if we don't abdicate it.
No, I mean, and that's the thing is everyone, from Israel to Vietnam, I mean, from a democracy to a communist system, realizes how very nasty interaction with the People's Republic of China can be, not the Chinese people, but the leadership. And just look at what they've done to the world in the last year. I don't care if they did it on purpose or not. They did it, and they could do it again. And so I think rallying people behind the United States should be pretty easy right now if this administration has the will to do it.
If they have the will. Listen, we hadn't actually talked on the phone in a while. It's always good to hear your voice. My best to the family. And I'm excited to have you where you are right now, where you can speak freely and write about this stuff. I'm following it and would love to get you back.
Absolutely. Anytime, Eric. And same back to your family.
Thank you. Victoria Coates, she was Deputy National Security Advisor to President Trump and went to the Middle East to help with the deals there on energy and peace. She's been a long-time friend of mine, wrote for years with me at redstate.com, and then started as an art historian and got involved in geopolitics and national security affairs, and just brilliant mind. People like her give me reassurance that those of us on the right are not going to run out of good ideas as we try to take this country back. She's just brilliant.
Want to be on the show? Call Eric now.
Hi there, it's Erick Erickson here. The phone number, should you wish to be a part of this here program, is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. I mentioned this a little bit yesterday. It was kind of going on as the show was happening. The Supreme Court was taking on the NCAA, and it did not go well for the NCAA. And I just actually find this really hilarious. Even Sam Alito and Clarence Thomas spoke up. You know, Clarence Thomas has a reputation of never talking during oral arguments, although on Zoom calls of late he has been. Typically, he believes that the briefs speak for themselves. He doesn't need to ask questions. But my goodness, let me read you this from ESPN. The justices of the Supreme Court of the United States questioned whether amateurism is an essential part of the NCAA's business model Wednesday during a landmark hearing for the future of college sports, while also expressing concerns about starting a slippery slope of judicial rulings that could lead to the destruction of an American tradition. The Supreme Court heard more than 90 minutes of oral arguments Wednesday in the NCAA versus Alston case, the first time the nation's highest court has weighed in on the business of college sports in nearly 4 decades. The question in front of the court is whether the NCAA deserves special relief from normal antitrust rules in order to protect its educational mission and preserve a tradition of amateurism in college sports. The court will make its ruling in the summer. A federal district court judge decided in her ruling in the Alston case in 2020 that the limits NCAA member schools mutually agree to place on what each school can provide to its athletes in compensation are illegal. The judge's ruling opens the door for athletes to receive unlimited benefits as long as they're related in some way to education. That includes items such as classroom equipment, study abroad travel, funding for postgraduate internships, and cash payments for academic achievements. The NCAA appealed, arguing that the loose guidelines of education-related benefits could be exploited in a way that will blur the lines between college sports and professional leagues. Whatever these labels, these new allowances are akin to professional salaries, says the NCAA's lawyer. Well, let me just say that Sam Alito didn't seem to be having any of it. Alito pointed out athletes already receive some payments in the form of scholarships, stipends, and other benefits, and those allowances have not caused a downturn in TV ratings or ticket sales. Waxman, the NCAA lawyer, said the NCAA defines payments as any compensation that goes beyond reasonable and necessary expenses. Amy Coney Barrett questioned why the NCAA should get to decide how to define what it means for an athlete to be paid. Several justices expressed skepticism about the NCAA's high-minded claims about amateurism. Justice Kagan asked why the court shouldn't see the NCAA as an organization that has undisputed power over its market and uses the idea of amateurism to fix the price of labor. Kagan said while amateurism may have been created more than a century ago to protect an institution providing social value, it doesn't really function that way today. You can only ride on the history for so long. A great deal has changed since 100 years ago, the way student athletes are treated. A great deal has changed since 1985, let alone 100 years ago. Kagan also asked whether the incremental increase in what athletes are allowed to make will lead to more litigation in the future. Brett Kavanaugh wondered what the end game would be for the plaintiffs to feel fully satisfied, worrying about the floodgates. Justice Breyer was the most adamantly opposed of his colleagues to treating college sports like other industries. I think if we really have a case here, it's a tough case for me. This is not an ordinary product. This is an effort to bring into the world something that's brought joy and all kinds of millions and millions of people, and it's only partly economic. Justice Thomas was complaining about the transfer portal and the wages of coaches. Thomas actually pointed out to the NCAA, you don't pay the athletes, but you use their performance to pay millions to the coaches. It was just, listen, I hate the NCAA, and to know that the United States Supreme Court unanimously hates the NCAA as well is actually pretty awesome. Now, I don't know how they're going to rule on this, but it was very clear. It was basically like a grievance session from John Roberts all the way down to the newest member of the court, Amy Coney Barrett. They were all complaining about the NCAA. And this comes on the heels of Kristi Noem in South Dakota essentially bending over backwards to kowtow to the NCAA by vetoing the transgender sports ban on colleges. It seemed, I mean, pretty brutal at the Supreme Court. At one moment, however, one of the lighthearted moment, one of the lawyers referred to Clarence Thomas as Chief Justice Thomas. And Chief Justice Robert shot back, there's not an opening for that position right now. Man, y'all, I mean, it genuinely, it was a brutal day for the NCAA. Reading through the arguments, let me read you this from CNBC. Thomas noted NCAA coaches make millions of dollars. One of the key arguments made by those opposing the NCAA's limits on players. It just strikes me as odd that the coaches' salaries have ballooned, he says. Amy Coney Barrett asked the NCAA's lawyers if his argument was really that consumers enjoy watching unpaid people play sports. And Waxman's response was, yes, that's our line. Wow. Chief Justice Roberts was sympathetic to the argument, but even he complained about the NCAA. Wow. Hello there. It is Erick Erickson here. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Super glad to have you with me. Nikki Haley is going to join me at the top of the hour. And tomorrow, Tim Keller is going to join me. I do not yet know what time. We are trying to be as accommodating to his schedule as possible. I may wind up having to actually do it this evening with him by phone and record it and play it tomorrow. I'll let y'all know. If we do that, it will probably be in the third hour of the show. But I'm not sure yet. He would like to be able to be with me live and let the conversation breathe. But I'm trying to be as accommodating as possible to him. His book is called Hope in Times of Fear, The Resurrection of the Meaning of Easter. If you don't know who Tim Keller is, he was the founding pastor of Redeemer in New York. It's a Presbyterian church in America, PCA church. I'm in that denomination. What's so interesting about Keller to me is that for a very long time, Keller was perceived by a lot of conservative evangelicals as being kind of a mushy, more moderate. In fact, some people still view him that way because of some of his writings on trying to reconcile creationism and evolution. Keller was speaking into cities, trying to draw people into church. Towards the latter days of Keller's ministry and now into retirement, he's been one of the most vocal critics within Christianity in America of critical theory, and he's become the most prominent critic of worldly sexual ethic, deviating from biblical sexual ethic on both gay marriage, transgenderism, things like that. Keller is he's surprised a lot of conservative evangelicals who thought he was a mushy moderate to actually speak, and one of the things Keller has said is for years he was speaking for Christians to need to show grace, but also they need to recognize that there are limits to what you can do as a Christian. And how do you engage the world and be friends with people? I'm excited to have this conversation with him tomorrow. We're really focusing on his book. And I've mentioned this. Tomorrow I'll spend a lot of time on it because it's Good Friday, and I always do a special show on Good Friday. But one of the most interesting points that he makes, and he relies on N.T. Wright. N.T. Wright is an Anglican minister and theologian, probably one of the most detailed ones. He goes a little wobbly. I'm not a huge fan of N.T. Wright, but he's written a book, The Resurrection of the Son of God. I had to read it in seminary, and it's about 1,000 pages long. And one of the things that N.T. Wright points out is that there was not a language, a cultural tradition, a mythology, or a story anywhere on planet Earth 2,000 years ago that looked anything at all like the resurrection. And most of the people today all the people today who claim that there was a similar tradition actually are pointing to excerpted statements from people like Justin Martyr or word changes that were willfully made to misrepresent what the actual text of some of the early Christians said. There really is nothing like it. So I'm really, really excited to talk to him tomorrow. If you would like to get a copy of his book, it is a really good read. You can text the word data to the show number 877-973-7425. Text data to 877-973-7425. And I'll send you back a link to Keller's book that you can order it. And now I've got to talk real quickly about that. Why am I telling you text the word data to 877-973-7425? I just yesterday, as a matter of fact, got a text message to Clarice from AT&T, or not from AT&T, from Amazon.com, telling me if I just click this link, that I've got a credit at Amazon.com. I've gotten them for Freddie. I've gotten them for Eric. I've gotten them for Clarice. I've gotten them for Bethany. And you get these texts. I get them. I'm sure you're getting these spam text messages now. They're all scams. They're all spam. And they all look like they're coming from phone numbers. But actually what they're doing is they're coming from 5-digit numbers. Now, there is a term of art for what those 5-digit numbers are. I think they're called carrier access numbers. They're 5-digit numbers, short code numbers. the phone carriers in the country are deactivating those short code numbers. So, for example, we got a local ice cream parlor across the street from us, and that ice cream parlor, they're also the family owns a pizza restaurant, and they're all synced into one of these point systems where you put in your phone number, you get rewards, and the reward comes from a 5-digit short code number. It'll be like 55-007 comes up on your phone. Well, that's actually what's happening with these spam calls, and they're just spoofing a real phone number. It's not really that phone number. It's a short code masquerading as a regular phone number. So the telephone companies working with the FCC are banning short codes. June 1 is the cutoff date. There will be few exceptions except for healthcare and government. No one will be able to use these short codes anymore, and the whole purpose is to reduce the amount of spam text messages people are getting. That's why I've got to get y'all in the habit now. Instead of using the 33777 number, I've got to get you in the habit of using the 877-973-7425 number. It is highly important that y'all get into the habit of doing that, because your ability to use the short codes will be going away in the next couple of months. So if you want to order Tim Keller's book, I will text you back a link, but you've got to text the word data to the phone number 877-973-7425. Now, the long, complicated explanation, but I'm sure there's relief in sight to these text spam messages we're getting. Let's go to the phones. Ned and Macon, you're going to be up next. Ned, welcome.
Hey, Eric. Can you hear me all right?
I can hear you fine. Thank you.
Great. I am concerned about the subtext to the murders at the massage parlors in Atlanta, the spas as they call them.
Right.
It's widely known that most of Asian spas are actually prostitution fronts.
Mm-hmm.
And there are laws in the books. The Secretary of State has laws on therapeutic massage and penalties to these unlicensed places. Macon, Georgia has business license regulations which regulate these, and I have tried for years to get these enforced. I call Mr. Zimmerman at the Secretary of State's office and get lip service, and nothing happens. And now they're growing again in Macon.
They are
spread out. What is involved in convening a grand jury to look into the question of why these are not being enforced? Is there something not called a writ of mandamus or something to force these government agencies to do this?
So the writ of mandamus typically involves compelling a government officer to give you something that they're supposed to give you. So
okay.
What you've got to do is, first of all, you've got to have it's a complex pattern, but let me see if I can break this down a little bit for you. You've got to have a pattern of arrest that suggests human trafficking, and then you've got to have government intervention. Now, when I was on the city council in Macon and we pursued this, one of the things that I found, and there was actually a Department of Justice report that Janet Reno had written, and then it was put out at the beginning of the Bush administration under John Ashcroft's name, was that a lot of time what these massage parlors do is they find local landlords who are politically connected, who have an incentive to make sure that they're not investigated by by local governments. So, for example, it was not a surprise to me when I was on City Council of Macon that we had a couple of people who were involved in politics in Macon and Bibb County who were the landlords to these places and were actively opposed to government crackdown. But what we're finding is that if you can encourage your local governments to treat it as a problem, and a lot of them don't, but if you can get them to at least do some basic investigations, then you do have the ability to summon a grand jury and have a grand jury do some level of investigation into what's going on. You got to establish a pattern and practice. And unfortunately, like in Middle Georgia, I'm glad you called, Ned, because I've noticed that a lot of the places that shut down because of the city of Macon's efforts back in the mid-2000s, those same buildings are putting in new massage parlors, and they are 100% places that are engaged in prostitution. And everyone is dancing around the shootings in Atlanta and the fact that The guy was not a white supremacist. He says he was going to those places to have easy sexual encounters. And I know people. I do know people. I worked with a guy who one time bragged about having gone to one of those places while he was single. And something needs to be done. People tend to think that prostitution is a victimless crime, except we know through the pattern and practice of these places that oftentimes the women who are there are really there against their will.
Well, how about, for example, the Secretary of State, the therapeutic massage law of the state of Georgia has very well defined penalties for these places, and yet they're never enforced. And I'm wondering, is there any way to pressure, for example, the Secretary of State's office to actually levy the fines, close up the places?
I think there probably is. Part of that requires local business inspectors for counties getting involved. That was the thing we did back in the 2000s that they no longer do in Macon, is we got instead of using police, because that was the big argument, we're distracting from real crime, is we used the business inspectors to go in and it just enforce business regulations. And there's a component there with the Secretary of State to make that happen. Now, I will say this. We probably, at this moment in Georgia history, the biggest advocate to fight human trafficking in the state of Georgia happens to be the wife of the governor of the state of Georgia. It is her mission in life to shut these places down. And there's probably pressure brought to bear, and Marty Kemp is probably someone who can do this. Probably, I imagine.
Check with Marty Kemp.
Well, we're talking about it. I assure you, someone's listening who can raise this issue with her. I promise you that. She cares deeply about this issue, and the fact that local governments in the state used to enforce this stuff and no longer do. There's a side angle here, and Ned, I'm going to let you go on this one, let you listen on the radio here on this one, and this is part of something that everybody needs to understand here. Is local governments in Georgia used to care deeply about this issue. Gwinnett County led the way to shut these places down in the early 2000s. And they moved further down the interstate. A Justice Department report from the early 2000s showed that they tend to crop up within about a 30-minute drive of a local military installation. People from the bases, they leave base, they drive 30 minutes, they engage, they go back to the base. And they were seen in the early 2000s. There was a prevailing sentiment, anti-crime sentiment, called the broken window theory. Rudy Giuliani made popular in the 90s in New York. And essentially, the broken window theory is, if you see a building that has a broken window and the window stays broken for a long period of time, you know for certain that that building is vacant. And crime eventually will move in because nobody's there. And the same way, if you see a bunch of areas of the state that have these Asian massage parlors that overwhelmingly the data shows tend to be places where prostitution happens, then other criminal elements see that as an invitation to come in and be creative about crime, drug dealers and the like. And if you can stamp out the one, you cause the others to leave or to go away. This is what Rudy Giuliani, who lost his mind at some point, but back in the day, as mayor of New York, engaged in the broken window theory. For example, they cracked down on jaywalking in the city of New York. If you were jaywalking in New York, you were walking with a crosswalk, didn't say walk, or you're walking across the street where there was no crosswalk, you were going to get a ticket. Now, blocking the box became a thing in New York City. The box is where the intersection meets and forms the square. If your car was inside the intersection and the light turned red and you were stuck and you were backing up traffic, you were going to get a $500 fine there on the spot. There was a policeman on every corner of New York. And it was a way to reduce crime. And it worked, by the way. It worked. Critical race theorists have over time posited that was racism. It was systemic racism. And liberal advocates have demanded that we walk away from the broken window theory of crime. And you know what the result is? Crime is on the rise in the United States for the first time in 40 years. Crime in the United States is on the rise. It is not a surprise that in the middle Georgia area, as crime is on the rise, shootings are on the rise, gang violence is on the rise, drug crimes are on the rise, The precursor to all of those was in Middle Georgia. You saw a rise of the spas come back, the rise of the Asian-themed massage parlors. They started coming back in. The police weren't enforcing it, and it was a big red flag that these places have gotten lax on crime. And correspondingly, thereafter, you started to see a rise in shootings, a rise in drugs, a rise in all sorts of social instability related to crime because the broken window was there. And people saw the broken window in the form of the massage parlor and decided, hey, they're not enforcing the laws anymore. Let's go back in and get crazy. Marty Kemp, genuinely, I mean this in all sincerity, is passionate about human trafficking. And she wants to stamp it out. And having her as the first lady could help tremendously. I do not want to cast aspersions on the people who died when a crazed gunman opened fire in 3 massage parlors. But I also don't think that we should avoid discussing the fact of what happens in many of those places. And that young man seemed pretty insistent that it was happening in the places that he was opening fire on, and he was trying to rid the temptation in his life as he was struggling with sexual demons. It's tragic. It's awful what happened. But also we need to recognize what is happening in these places and that they are precursors to expansions of crime in local communities, because once they start setting up shop, it's a big red flag to everyone else that, hey, no one's enforcing the laws around here. Let's go in. You want to enforce the laws and keep your community safe? That's an area that you got to tackle.
Well connected and well respected.
First Liberty Building and Loan. If you need access to capital, credit, your lending decisions that are creative financing decisions for your business, not for yourself, for your business, and we're talking 6 figures and higher, up into the millions of dollars, First Liberty Building and Loan in Union, Georgia can help you. They're local to us here in Georgia, where I am. The Frost family, they're a great family. They've been doing this since the early 90s. They want to help your business get to yes when it comes to financing and lending decisions. Go to firstlibertyga.com, firstlibertyga.com. Spend 5 minutes with the Frost family. They'll see if they're a good fit for you, but send a business. Great way to help this program as well is to send business to them. But man, y'all, I adore the Frosts to begin with. and they're super people, and they do a great job. FirstLibertyGA.com. The Democrats are having a problem, and this, I think, is just somewhat hilarious to me. They want to get rid of they want to get rid of the SALT restrictions. Now, SALT, I've talked about this a little bit before. I find it funny. Oh, and by the way, terrible of me, I should note Nikki Haley is going to join me in the next half hour. SALT is state and local taxes. SALT. Under the federal tax code, until the Trump tax cuts, you could deduct 100% of your state and local taxes from your federal taxes. So if you owed your state government $4,000, you could deduct the $4,000 in your federal income taxes. Not a credit, a deduction. Credit, remember, is a dollar for dollar offset. A deduction is not. So the Trump administration capped the SALT deduction. So rich people in New York and California and Illinois and New England states like Connecticut and New Jersey, they could not deduct 100% of their state and local taxes from their federal taxes. And this was viewed by blue states as punitive to them. The reason being is because those tend to be high tax states, and they could raise taxes really high because you got to deduct that money from the federal government. It was a tax cut for the rich. Now, for years and years, the Democrats have been telling us that the Republicans are the party of the rich people. I've been telling you for years that that's not really true. And here comes some great proof of it, that it is the Democrats who want to restore the full SALT deduction. The problem here is that should you do that, you disrupt the Democrats' ability to move things with reconciliation. And not every Democrat wants to do it. Keep in mind here, the Democrats have a 5-seat majority in the House of Representatives. Now that they've rejected the Iowa challenge, well, they didn't reject it. Pressure was brought to bear, and Rita Hart, the Democrat there, gave it away. I gotta tell you, what happens is the Republicans are targeting 9 Democratic members of Congress. They're going to be redistricted anyway, and they're going to be redistricted into districts that are even more Republican. That's going to give the Republicans control of the House if they're successful. Now, here's the thing. If this happens, not only do the Republicans take back the House of Representatives, but they more and more define the Democrats as the party of rich. And, you know, it works when you look at the Hollywood elite and the rich fat cats of New York City who want tax breaks, and it's the Republicans who want to give them the tax breaks. It's the Republicans who insist, or it's the Democrats who insist that we do the SALT deduction. The Democrats are divided over this. They can only lose 3 votes in the House, and there's so much disarray over this with House Democrats, it may scrap their entire infrastructure plan unless they can hammer it out. It puts the Democrats on the side of the rich elite people, which is where they've been for a while. Hello and welcome. It is Erick Erickson here, the Erick Erickson Show. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. You can go to ewerickson.com. I'm all over the internet at EW Erickson. Maybe I should trademark it. Who knows? Joining me by phone, a longtime friend of mine you might have heard of, the former ambassador to the United Nations and governor of South Carolina, my friend Nikki Haley. How are you? Happy Easter.
Good morning, Eric. Happy Easter. Great to be with you.
So, you know, I'm when your staff reached out and said you could be on this week, I had a bunch of stuff that I wanted to talk to you about, but I know one of these is something you and I both care about. It can, as governor of South Carolina, you experience this sort of nonsense. The collaboration of the left and corporate America to punish states that don't do things they want, like Delta and Coca-Cola now attacking Georgia. The president, I can't remember the last time a president of the United States encouraged a boycott of a state because they passed a law he didn't like. And yet here we are with this election bill in Georgia that really doesn't do a whole lot.
You know, I mean, this is really infuriating, Eric. If you think back to when I was governor of South Carolina, I pushed for voter ID and was absolutely vilified. They said that I was trying to keep people from voting and that minorities wouldn't be able to get a picture ID, and they gave all these excuses. And I said then, and I say now, if you have to show a photo ID to get on an airplane, if you have to show photo ID to buy Sudafed, you should have to show a picture ID to protect the integrity of the voting process. What is infuriating about this is Democrats continue to think that minorities are stupid. They're not stupid. They are perfectly capable of getting a picture ID. And they did this to me in South Carolina, and there was all this uproar saying that I was disenfranchising voters until they said because people would not be able to get to the DMV to get a photo ID. And I said, okay, fine. I will make sure everyone that needs a photo ID, I will go to their home, we will pick them up, we will take them to the DMV, get them a picture, and we will return them. This was announced all over every television network in South Carolina and every newspaper of 5 million people. Do you want to know how many phone calls we got that they needed help?
Very few.
25.
Wow.
25. And the thing is, you know, Democrats want to think that minorities can't do for themselves, that we need to make sure we protect them from themselves. Minorities are smarter than that. They want to protect the integrity of their vote. They want to make sure that when they vote, no one else is stealing their ID, that it is, you know, them as getting credit for that vote. So don't imply that they can't, you know, that they're being disenfranchised. They deserve the right to vote and be able to show a picture ID to do that. And then you go, secondly, and they're making up all of these lies saying that, you know, you can't get food and water. That's ludicrous. You can't have someone come up to you within a certain number of feet of the voting process. I've been in multiple elections. You do this to protect the integrity of the voting process. They can have water stands there. Georgia even made sure that you've got early voting. There's nothing that's disenfranchising about this. But you look at what corporate America is doing, they're lazy. They're lazy. Coke and Delta had every opportunity to complain about this prior to the law passing. The reason they're bringing it up now is because they're getting complaints and they're too lazy to say there's nothing wrong with this bill. So it's just easier for them to go and criticize it because they don't want to get canceled.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would really like your thoughts on this aspect of it, because I'm not a person who advocates a lot of boycotts. I shop where I want to shop. I don't shop where I don't want to shop. I don't make a big deal about it. And now we've got progressive groups. I don't know if you've heard about this one. There's an app you can get in the app stores that you can put on your phone. And if you're a progressive shopping at the grocery store, you can scan the UPC labels and see if this company has given to conservative causes. So you don't have to buy their product. And they want to boycott Delta and Coca-Cola. And the Fortune 500 seems to be deeply afraid of getting boycotted. And as a result, they've moved decisively to the left culturally out of fear, it seems like. And there are a lot of conservatives, and their attitude is, well, we got to punch back and we've got to boycott and we've got to behave just like them. And I'm not sure that's the answer, but I'm struggling to come up with an alternative.
It's not the answer, but this is going to backfire. I mean, the cancel culture is going to reach a point where suddenly this is going to completely and totally backfire. I mean, I was shocked, honestly, yesterday when you've got Laura Trump, who has a interview with the president
Right.
that she goes to put out on Facebook and Instagram, and they literally ban you from seeing the former president of the United States. I don't care what anyone thinks about him. The idea that big tech thinks they can get away with that, the idea that they'll cancel Dr. Seuss books, the idea that they're continuing to do all this, at some point it's going to break. So conservatives don't need to stoop to that level. We need to continue to do what's right. We need to continue to stay above the fray, but we need to continue to call it out every time we see it. That's the key, is be loud about it. Don't be lazy. Be loud and make sure you do something about it. And I think that, the idea that the Democrats think that they have this massive push to cancel everything, you just wait until 2022. Because
Right.
in 2022, we are going to win the House back. We're going to win the Senate back. We're going to win gubernatorial races back. And then they're going to be sitting there crying that life is unfair. And so, no, they're pushing themselves in a corner. You look at, in the first 100 days of Biden, he's already looking at spending over $4 trillion.
Right.
He's looking at raising taxes. He's looking at killing Keystone Pipeline. He's been humiliated. His team's been humiliated by China. He's been challenged to a debate by Putin. He's now watched China and Iran get this massive deal together that's going to make the entire world less safe. North Korea is testing ballistic missiles. This is a disaster.
So, yes, it is a disaster. And in fact, let me pivot away from the question I wanted to ask you to this one. I had on, I think you've met her before, my friend Victoria Coach. She was a deputy national security advisor for the president. And she was on the last hour. And we were talking about, it was really amazing that a gust of wind could turn a tanker and tie up the global supply chain in the Suez Canal. And now you've got Iran and China collaborating together. The Biden administration essentially telling Saudi Arabia, lay off the Yemen terror group so we can drive up the price of oil when they bomb your refineries. There have got to be a lot of people rubbing their hands together thinking we can tie up the Suez Canal without a gust of wind and screw up the entire Western economic system.
I mean, this is really scary. I mean, when I look at the situation with China, I am a huge advocate for boycotting the Chinese Olympics because I know how they think. And the last time they hosted the Olympics, they were basically trying to show that they were coming into their own. This next Olympics is them really trying to show the world that they are now the new superpower of the world. And so when you look at kind of all the steps they've taken, the fact that no one has pointed the finger at China on COVID and said, how can this happen, and let's punish them for it. The idea that China has now made friends with, done a deal with Russia, they've done a deal with Iran, they're doing a deal with North Korea, they're getting close to Venezuela. And in this Chinese-Iranian deal, Eric, they have agreed to cooperate militarily, which is a concern. They have agreed to do an oil deal with Iran, which is a big concern because Iran no longer needs the Iran deal from the U.S. and the Europeans. With this deal that China's doing, massive influx of money going into Iran, which is going to cover their proxies in Yemen, in Syria, in Iraq. So that goes, and then they go and they do a Chinese-Iranian bank deal, which is one step further that China and Russia are trying to do to make sure that the U.S. dollar is no longer the world reserve. This is scary stuff. And Biden's response to that is to increase the corporate tax higher than the Chinese corporate tax. Like it truly is. You can't make this up. They are so way over their head on all things foreign policy, and everybody recognizes it. All the countries around the world recognize this. That's why they're gravitating to China. It's why China's being bullish. Once the Olympics are over, you're going to see China try and take on Taiwan. I mean, it's a real problem. And you talk about what happened in the Suez Canal. You're exactly right. I mean, look at how that shut off literally billions of dollars worth of trade. And, China's in the catbird seat.
Right. And not only are they in the catbird seat, you do have the Biden administration just seeming – it's almost like they want to look at every single thing Donald Trump did and say, let's get rid of all of it without accessing the consequences, which has also led to the situation at the border where – even you've got the Washington Post acknowledging that President Trump settled on a reasonable solution to deal with what was happening. And by blowing it all up, the Biden administration has caused the problem.
Well, I actually worked on the border issue within the Trump administration as well. I went to Honduras. I went to Guatemala. And, a lot of this is coming from those two countries in El Salvador. What I can tell you is these countries aren't anti-American, which is really important. They're actually our friends, especially Honduras and Guatemala. And what President Trump did that was so good was, yes, we were taking names on our enemies, but on our friends, we also told them what we expected of them. And so when I went to Honduras and Guatemala, we told them, look, we're going to continue to help you on training. We're going to continue to help you in terms of other aspects, but you have to keep your problems here. Their problems were gangs, drugs, human trafficking, poverty. We were dealing with those issues there. We made sure that if they came to Mexico, we did the Mexico deal so that they stayed in Mexico. That's the reason tons of people didn't come, is because these gangsters charge $3,500 a person to get you over the border. They make a ton of money. If those people in Guatemala and Honduras see that they're not going to get there, they won't pay the money. There's a serious issue when you see all of these people show up at the border in Biden's campaign T-shirts. Like, that was, to me, the most shocking, because they were celebrating that Biden's there. You have Mexican President Obrador pretty much saying that this whole border situation is the fault of Biden, and that he has literally messed up everything that Trump and he worked on. And then you see the 3- and 5-year-old dropped over a 14-foot fence overnight. If you haven't seen the images of that, I mean, as a mom, it's like heartbreaking that this is happening, but it's because they're getting paid just to make sure those kids fall over the fence, and they know that Border Patrol is going to find them. It's really terrible.
It's so sad to see. Our mutual friend Chip Roy. I saw a video. He was down at the border last night and stumbled across a group of kids who were lost, who were coming in. I saw that this morning on TV. It's just like, wow. One, I know the guy, and then two, he's out there doing TV interviews, and random group of kids lost in the desert happens to show up. It happened way too common. It's amazing what happens when an administration rushes in and just decides, hey, we're going to undo everything Trump did because Orange Man bad, and now we're stuck with humanitarian crises and a resurgent China. Wow. So now I got to ask you, in light of all of this stuff, let's talk about your group real quick, where people can be connected to what you're doing out in the country right now.
Well, we are all focused on 2022. We are going to win the House back. We're going to push to win the Senate back. I campaigned for a lot of House members, senators, the president, gubernatorial members prior to November, and we wanted to get more actively involved. And so what we're going to do is make sure we recruit really good quality candidates, just like we did prior to November, and we're going to make sure they win. And we've already endorsed 2 candidates. The first one, we wanted to bring a lot of attention several weeks back when no one was paying attention to Marionette Miller Meeks. I campaigned for her prior to November. Pelosi was doing a massive power play where the Democrat, where Miller Meeks won by 6 votes. The Democrat didn't appeal it in Iowa. Basically, a bipartisan commission certified the votes, and yet that Democrat went to Pelosi and asked her to stop it. Pelosi almost did, and she got pushback from some of her Democrats. Great win yesterday when the Democrat brought those charges down. So that was our first endorsement. The second was Julia Letlow. She won the special election seat in Louisiana and is going to be a fantastic
she really is.
member. Her husband is the one that died of COVID right before getting sworn in, and she's a superstar. Super excited about her. And so we're going to do that, but we're also going to work on expanding our tent. We're going to look at bringing in terms of into the Republican Party, Hispanics, the Jewish community, the Asian community. I know because I did this in South Carolina. We have to reach out to them. We have to have conversations with them, because when we do, they see we have so much more in common than not. And that no one's doing that. And it's really important. So we're doing a lot of different fronts. For anybody that's interested in supporting, go to standforamericapac.com. It's really great things. We're super excited. And look, we're going to win in 2022. The only thing worse than 2 years of Biden is 4 years of Biden. And we're going to make sure that we have a stopgap along the way.
Amen. Listen, it's always good to talk to you. Thank you for stopping by.
No, take care, my friend. Great to see you.
You
Great
too.
to talk to you.
Take care. Governor Ambassador Nikki Haley, standforamerica.com or standforamericapac.com. She's out trying to get a group of conservatives elected to the House and campaigning for good initiatives across the country. Always good to talk to her. A longtime friend of mine.
You can follow Erick around social media.
Hello there. It is Erick Erickson here. The phone number is 877-97 Eric 877-973-7425. In Jasper, Georgia, Rocco's Rockin' Affair is happening May 1st and 2nd, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. both days. They're up 575 from Atlanta. They're up in Jasper, Pickens County. Now, if you want to be a vendor, they're having a great gathering and they're looking for vendors from all over the state to come help celebrate the return of warm weather, the return of getting out of our house. If you're interested at all, go to roccosjasper.com. roccosjasper.com. Right now, they got Reformation Brewery, Coca-Cola, Jasper Jeep, involved Pickens Pets up in Pickens County is partnering with them. It's going to have food, friends, family, kids, pets, you name it, 2 days. Rocco's Rockin' Affair, May 1st and 2nd, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Again, it doesn't matter where you're listening to me right now, anywhere. You want to be a part of this, it's going to be a big shindig up there. A lot of people getting together just to celebrate the warm weather. It's going to be outside. You can join in. If you want to be a vendor, though, they're looking for vendors right now. The event's free for families, so they need some help pulling this off. roccosjasper.com is the website to go to. when I was 10 or 11 years old, I was involved in I don't know if I should call it a plane crash or not. I guess I should call it a plane crash. We landed on a runway without wheels, lots of foam, and had to go down the slide. I was traveling through Amsterdam, coming back to the United States by myself. It was the very first time my parents ever let me fly by myself. And I know my wife is always horrified by the story because it makes your parents sound like abusive or something. You're flying halfway around the world by yourself. It's what every kid did. And it was a lot of fun. I did it once this happened to me. My parents let me go anywhere by myself. I love to travel. I love to travel internationally. And I like to just go and tour a city. But I did this, and as a result of the delays, having to ditch the plane and get another plane, I landed in Amsterdam. I was by myself without my family and missed my flight to Atlanta, Georgia. And I had to hang out in Amsterdam. And ironically, this is the funniest part of the story is actually not the plane breaking down and the hydraulic failures and everything else. It's the getting to Amsterdam, and all of the hotels around Schiphol Airport were full because the Jehovah's Witnesses were having their international conferences they used to do regularly at Schiphol outside of Amsterdam at the airport there. So they had to put me in a Crown Plaza hotel that was right on the edge of the red light district in Amsterdam. And I'm in Amsterdam, and when I was a kid, we would always go to Amsterdam, and because the time changes and when you land stuff, it was always dark. And here I am, I'm in Amsterdam, and the sun is up. And so I got to look around for a little bit before I go crash at my hotel room. I'm exhausted. As I'm asleep, hotel employees decide to come lay down on the bed and start getting it on, and I wake up screaming. That was another exciting. This true story, by the way. All of this is true. Amsterdam is a city known for its tourists. You can buy. It's one of the first places to ever legalize marijuana. You can buy marijuana in coffee houses, they call it. It's actually places to go get high. They've got the red light district, the brothels, and the tourists, and they essentially celebrate it as it is the original Sin City. Well, with the pandemic, their tourism has gone away. The city emptied out overnight, it seems like, back last March when Europe started shutting down. And you know what? The Dutch have decided they kind of like their city without tourists. Most cities in the world are struggling. Like London, for example, is desperate to figure out ways to get tourists to come back to London. Amsterdam, on the other hand, is thinking, you know what? Maybe we should start cracking down on all the stuff that brought the tourists here. So they're going to impose restrictions on short-term vacation rentals like Airbnbs. They're going to start shutting down parts of the red light district and banning sex tourism. They're going to ban sales of marijuana, hash, and other drugs to visitors because they don't want those tourists coming back, particularly that type of tourist, the type of tourist who wants to come do drugs and visit prostitutes. They don't want them coming back in. So Amsterdam, unlike all the other European cities that are desperate to get the tourists back, the Dutch have decided, we kind of like Amsterdam without the tourists here. Which, of course, could affect Schiphol Airport as a big international hub with KLM there. But they want to curtail the tourists. Can't say as I blame. It actually is a beautiful, beautiful city, but for the tourists and the Dutch. It really is a gorgeous, gorgeous city. Question. How many people do you think really know what Jim Crow was? How many people think they know what Jim Crow was? Because this Biden, I just saw Michael Duncan, who's runs one of the Republican super PACs out there, saying, "Where's the fact check on this Jim Crow 2.0 stuff?" Because I assure you, it is nothing like Jim Crow. And I didn't have to be around in the era. You know, being on the city council in Macon back in the early 2000s, one of the things we kept was the signs in there's in the city of Macon, Georgia, there is a public transit building. The terminal station is at the end of Cherry Street. If you've ever been to downtown Macon, this is a great time of year to go, by the way. There's a train station, terminal station there, and on the inside of it, there are still the signs that say whites only, colored water fountain, things like that. And the city made the conscious decision, black and white, to allow those signs to remain as a reminder of the history of the place. And it actually now economically, interestingly enough, has helped because we get a lot of historic movies that want to go into Macon, and they film in that building because the original signs are still there for use by white people only. You've got the doors for black people and the doors for white people, the water fountains, the bathrooms, all of that. It's been left in place. And what's so interesting is in Middle Georgia, it's the newcomers from out of state who've moved in who are so offended by it, they want it gone. And it's the black and white long-term residents of Middle Georgia who are like, no, we're keeping it. We want to remind people of what it was like. So what really was Jim Crow? Jim Crow embraced a whole lot of policies about separate but equal operation. And it wasn't equal, by the way. This is one of the mythologies, is that it was somehow equal. It was not. Jim Crow was, where did it come from? After the Civil War, it originated. It can be found as early, and I'm reading this from Wikipedia, you'll have to forgive me, 1892, in the title of a New York Times article about Louisiana requiring segregated railroad cars. The origin of the phrase Jim Crow is often attributed to Jump Jim Crow, a song dance caricature of black people performed by Thomas Rice, a white actor who was in blackface. And it was used to pick on, satirize, ridicule Andrew Jackson's populist policies. Jim Crow by 1838 had become a pejorative expression for a black person. When Southern legislatures passed laws of racial segregation, those became known as Jim Crow laws. Now, what happened? Well, let me read you some of this. The South began to restrict the ability for black people to vote. They had poll taxes, literacy and comprehension tests, residency and record-keeping requirements that were burdensome. They grandfathered in the ability of illiterate white people to vote, but not black people. They embraced the idea of separate but equal. There would be separate water fountains, separate bathrooms, separate schools. The growth of a thriving black middle class was punished between taxes and economic opportunity. As highways began to be built through the South, the interstate system, black neighborhoods were targeted to be bulldozed for the highway. There were prohibitions on serving on juries, prohibitions on running for local office. More and more black residents couldn't run for office. They were bullied. They had burdens placed on them that weren't placed on white people wanting to run for office, signature requirements and the like. Public libraries that were visited by black people were defunded. They were no longer allowed to visit white libraries. In public schools, predominantly black schools were given secondhand books from the white schools. As the white schools, books were running out, they were passed down to the black schools. They were not equal. They were worse. Most public libraries were moved into white neighborhoods, black neighborhoods given something inferior. And on it went. That's not what the Georgia law does. And if you say it's Jim Crow 2.0, you're a liar. You're a liar. 70% of black residents in Georgia want photo ID. The Georgia law requires that new poll locations, new precincts, and new voting machines be added if lines get long. You're a liar if you think it's Jim Crow 2.0, and yet Stacey Abrams and the Democrats are embracing that lie. They're embracing the lie not to get rid of the law, though. You need to understand this. They're embracing the lie because they want to build a moral case against the filibuster. They want to build a case to get rid of the filibuster so that they can pass a whole slew of progressive agendas. And because they're attacking the Georgia law with every lie they can, they're trying to sow the belief, using the American media also not telling the truth, sow the belief into the minds of the American public that somehow this is a return to something it is not. And the danger here, honestly, one of the dangers, is that it actually minimizes what Jim Crow did. It's like calling everything racist today. Everything you don't like is racist. It minimizes racism. When you call something you don't like Jim Crow, it minimizes the insidiousness of Jim Crow. And they don't really care because they believe they're culturally dominant. And frankly, they are culturally dominant. They're not dominant within the mass of the public, but within cultural institutions, they are. And that's what they think matters. Star Wars actor Mark Hamill and Ford versus Ferrari director James Mangold were among the first to announce that they plan to avoid working in Georgia until something's done about Georgia's new law. The new law adds early voting access for most counties, adds mandatory Saturdays for voting, allows Sunday voting as an option. It standardizes early voting hours from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. or as long as 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. if the lines need it. It makes mandatory a state-issued photo ID when requesting an absentee ballot. It limits the number of drop boxes in the state, but now legalizes them. It requires them to be placed at early voting locations. It prohibits handing out food and water within 150 feet of polling locations, except by poll workers. It shortens runoff elections from 9 weeks to 4 weeks, something mercifully that the voters of Georgia want. And yet, here's the attack by James Mangold, the Ford versus Ferrari director. Georgia has been using cash to steal movie jobs from other states that allow people to vote. I don't want to play there. I'm not telling anyone else what to do. Mark Hamill as well says he is not going to work in Georgia either. Now, I got to tell you, I don't care. I don't care. What's so funny here is the Democrats in Georgia reacting to this. The Democrats in Georgia are saying, but wait, we just gave you President Biden. We gave you Raphael Warnock. We gave you John Ossoff. And now, because we hadn't finished the job, you're going to punish us and make it harder for us to finish the job? They're yelling about this. I find it hilarious. The movie and film industry in Georgia, which has been helping Georgia move to the left, if we're honest about it, although there are a lot of conservatives who work in it. I continue to encounter, listening to this very program, the number of conservatives who work in the film industry in Georgia. They have to be quiet about it, but they're there. And the film industry overall is like, well, we're not going to work in Georgia anymore. That only helps the Republicans. I mean, that actually does help. You're not having the Hollywood industry come into Georgia. That's actually a good thing for Georgia, frankly. Now listen, there's a lot of creative types who have moved to Georgia, and they are good, conservative, hardworking people. I know a lot of them. A lot of them listen to this program. And I hate it that the film industry is going to cut off their nose to spite their face for them. Tyler Perry is pointing out that it's probably not a good idea to bail on the state if you want to turn Georgia blue. As some consider boycotting, please remember that we did turn Georgia blue, and there is a gubernatorial race on the horizon. That's the beauty of a democracy, he said. But every time a state doesn't get its way, the Hollywood film industry says we're going to pull out. You know what? let them pull out. Call their bluff. I don't really think they are. They've invested too much. They make too much money. Ultimately, these businesses depend on the money. And in depending on the money, they're not going to bail too long. Remember, it's like the pro-life legislators, the fetal heartbeat legislators. Oh, we're going to boycott over this. They didn't. They'll come back, particularly as California continues to screw up its pandemic planning and Georgia opens up for business. They're going to come back. They are. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Rooster in Athens, you're up next. Welcome, Rooster. How are you? Rooster?
Hey, Eric. I had to mute you for a second. I was inside the office. I heard you talking about having the talk with your son.
Yeah.
And I was gonna recommend something, which I will, but I'm gonna make the mention that there's two talks that we have to have with our sons. The one is about not being the only one eating food in the house, and the other one being about purity.
Yeah.
And with the purity one, I was gonna say that me and a friend of mine did something. We did. Dennis Rainey has a passport to purity.
I've got it. I haven't.
Really good course that.
I haven't used it. I haven't even opened it. But you telling me this means I'm probably going to have to.
It's a really, really awesome way to talk about sexuality, and it goes about talking about what God designed sex for, what purity is all about, and then about our identity is not in our sexuality; it's in what God says who we are and how to use that as an adult.
Oh yeah, a buddy of mine actually last year recommended that I go on and get it for when the time came, and I put it on a shelf. And now that you mentioned it, I do know I've got it. It's still in the plastic. I guess I'm going to have to get it out. But the other one that we, particularly in the South, we got to have the gun safety talk too.
Well, actually, we didn't have to have that talk in my family because we started gun safety with Nerf guns.
Well, there you go. Listen,
we started out that if they're wanting to play Nerf, they've got to have on safety goggles, and if you're not using safety goggles, you can't play the Nerf game. And you don't even point at other people with the Nerf guns. And my son's like, oh, you're just being this, that, and the other. I was like, no, gun safety. Either you do it or you don't.
Yeah, I should have done that with guns. Right now, my kid's idea of Nerf gun safety is he doesn't shoot me in the crotch. And now speaking of the Nerf guns, they've got the ones that have the little foam balls, and those suckers go fast and they hurt.
They do. And I'm making the bridge from Nerf up to airsoft here sometime. And I just don't think my son takes it seriously. And I'm like, dude, it's not a game.
Yeah. I gotta work on all of that. But yeah, and you're right about the eating because he's so I got like the pickiest eater on the planet is my kid, and he's starting to develop this appetite. And I mean, we like going through peanut butter and jelly and bread on a regular basis. He's starting to grow. His foot is he's not quite tall, but his mom and him have the same shoe size now, and he's just turned 12, and she's starting to freak out. Like, how is he starting to grow like this? So yeah, we're hitting it. Look, I appreciate the advice. I'm going to get it's Dennis Rainey, Passport to Purity. I appreciate the recommendation on that one. I've got it. I've had now. It's Rooster's recommended it here. Friend of mine who actually writes about these issues and is an ethics professor at Southern Seminary for Al Mohler, highly recommended it last year. I'm going to have to go down that road, but man, brave new world here as your kids grow up. I'm dealing with this stuff. Somebody asked me the other day if my wife and I would ever have another child. And I was like, well, number one, we can't. Number two, I don't know that I want to give up the sleep. God bless you, young people who are just having kids.
Want to be on the show? Call Eric now at
State of play in the industry, I suppose. Welcome back here. Maggie Lee is one of the great local reporters in the state of Georgia. Covers a lot of local politics in Georgia. And she is not an April Fool's joke either. She has decided she is stepping away from the world of BS and into the world of real BS. She is leaving day-to-day local political reporting in Georgia to become a market gardener, actually growing vegetables. Talk about a growth industry she's moving into as journalism dies. She genuinely is in Fairburn, Georgia, going to be growing a very large plot of land and turning it into market gardening. I got to tell you, as I get older, fresh, seasonal. You know, I can't say the word seasonal. I don't know why, but every time I try to say seasonal, it comes out seasonable. Reasonable seasonal. But she's going to grow a garden and sell the vegetables. It's one thing. We used to get fresh vegetables in our house once a week, and it became a bit much for us. We needed to save some money, and we got rid of it. And honestly, we were throwing a lot of it away because we weren't actually cooking with it, because my schedule's been so crazy. And now I'm done at 3:00, and I can actually think about what to cook for supper and put stuff on. And I'm about ready to get back to it. I'm going to have to. So I developed a Brussels sprout recipe. And essentially I got my Rectech smoker. It's like a Traeger, but better. And why is it better? I should just say that Rectech, it's not just a Georgia-made company. They use a higher quality steel than the Traeger, and it's not assembled in China. Now, the parts are manufactured in China, but the steel quality is better. They make their computer system and their firing system here in the U.S., not in China. And so the build quality is better. It's got a better warranty. It's more dependable. It gets hotter than a Traeger, so you can grill on it. Most pellet grills, the truth is you can't really grill on them. You can with a Rectech, and it's got a better smoke flavor. It gets lower in temperature and hotter in temperature than your average pellet grill. And I've got a big green egg as well. I just don't use it as much anymore because I can flip a switch with the Rectech and I can get fantastic results with it. But I got a recipe that I kind of developed myself where I take slices of bacon and cut them in half. And then I take squirt the squeeze bottle of honey and do a line down the middle of the piece of bacon. And then I take Brussels sprouts. I know, Brussels sprouts. And I slice them in half. And I wrap the bacon around the Brussels sprouts. And then I put them on the Rectech for about 30, 40 minutes at 250. And it renders the bacon. The bacon fat makes the Brussels sprouts sweeter because the Brussels sprouts don't get too hot in temperature. If Brussels sprouts get too hot in temperature, they get sulfurous. But you keep them at 250, they don't get sulfurous. And then the bacon crisps up around them and the honey soaks into them. So you get the smoky, savory, sweet Brussels sprout. And I can eat Brussels sprouts like that. Not hard to do. You just keep the slice bacon in half, slice the Brussels sprouts lengthwise in half, take out the outer leaves that are trying to fall off, trim them up, and it works really well every time. I have fallen in love with this Rectech. Now I've got a professional grill as well, and I use it for the grilling. I don't use my Rectech for grilling any more than I use my big green egg for grilling. I just use it for smoking. I can use it for grilling because it gets hot enough, but I like it for smoking, and I can put multiple racks of ribs on it, and the Brussels sprouts, it's just great. I really do like it. I don't cook enough these days. Believe it or not, with my schedule change and all, I haven't done a lot of cooking, and now I'm ready to get back to it. Now that I'm free at 3, I got a new batch of cookbooks that have come in. I'm sure y'all care. I'm sure you did. By the way, you want to know one of the effects of COVID? A crime wave. Keisha Lance Bottoms, the mayor of Atlanta, has announced plans to hire 250 new police officers and add a retention bonus as part of a plan in Atlanta to reduce a rising crime wave and gun violence that she's blaming on COVID. Now, there really has been nationwide an increase in gun violence around the country and an increase in crime generally around the country. And a lot of people do tend to blame the pandemic, that people have been trapped in their houses. And there have been, burglaries, typically home robberies have gone down, home invasions have gone down, but other crimes, car thefts and the like, have gone up. Now, part of the problem here, though, in what is left unaddressed by the mayor are the number of police in Atlanta that quit, because the mayor and the Fulton DA decided that they wanted to make police officers the bad guys after the George Floyd riots. And when the police officers were trying to just enforce laws reasonably, if something went wrong, they were immediately thrown under the bus by the mayor. And so a lot of them packed up and quit and got jobs elsewhere. And now there aren't enough police in the Atlanta area to actually handle crime. So yeah, it's good they're hiring police officers, but just keep in mind the reason they're having to hire them is because so many quit. But the data does show there's a crime wave, and it's the first time in 40 years there's been a measurable uptick in crime in the United States. And it comes as people have been staying home. I don't know that we're going to be able to do it immediately, but I suspect in the next 10 years we're finally going to be able to have an honest assessment of the mental health toll that lockdowns and COVID have had on this country. And we're going to see a lot of people struggling as they never went back to school thanks to teachers unions around the country.